for everybody coming and taking the time. I'm Cindi Croft. I'm in private practice in Concord, and today I'm going to talk about the truth of cholesterol. So this is a very informal conversation. Please ask a question. If I say a word that's jargon, I don't mean to, but just sprout out. It's not a formal setting, so we can just have an open conversation. I prefer it that way. So to begin with, cholesterol, is it good or bad?
Full.
Good answer. Where do you think cholesterol comes from?
Food.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so first things, cholesterol, our body uses fats, proteins, and carbs as fuel. Fat is in our adipose cells, that's a fat cell, and fat is composed mostly of triglycerides and very little bit of cholesterol. About less than 1.5% of your fat tissue is actually cholesterol. So, fat is used as a fuel. Cholesterol is used as part of your fuel, depending on the level of activity and what's going on with your health or illness. So cholesterol, actually, 80% or better of it is de novo synthesis. That means your liver and your cells actually produce the majority of cholesterol that your body needs. This is a complicated pathway on the right. There's a few drugs there that show where they block the pathway of cholesterol synthesis. The rest of the cholesterol, less than 20% or so, is actually metabolized by the gut microbiome and absorbed through your gut. Okay, so cholesterol is a greasy substance. It does not just float around in your blood. So it has to be packaged on cargo ships. And the cargo ship is a protein. And those proteins are called ApoB proteins. The ones here on the left that are blue colored, those cargo ships are ApoB 48, that's what they're known as, and they only are the cargo ships that absorb cholesterol and triglycerides out of the food that you eat. The other cargo ships, the other proteins, are ApoB 100. Those cargo ships are made by your liver, and again, package cholesterol that your liver makes to be distributed out to all of your other cells for fuel and other reasons on those cargo ships. So in general, you can see way down to the right side, you see that LDL particle. Most people know about LDL cholesterol. Some people may have heard of Lp(a) particles. One ApoB cargo ship, one of these round vessels that you've seen, will carry a number of triglycerides and cholesterols on that cargo ship. So in general, it's thought or known that one ApoB molecule will carry 20 LDL particles. So, has anybody here had their ApoB level checked? Lp(a) checked? Okay, so we'll circle back to this, but I wanted to show this to you because there's a lot of different kinds of cholesterol in your body. It's just not LDL, okay? So, cholesterol is essential for life. Again, more than 80% of your own cholesterol that you have is manufactured by your liver. So, your body needs cholesterol. These are just a small list of ways that our body uses cholesterol. So first, your brain. Right? We're all known as being fatheads. About 70 to 80% fat in our brains. And nerves are insulated, like a wire is insulated with fat. The majority of the myelin that protects your nerves and helps with transduction of nerve signals is all different kinds of fat. The structure of your cell membrane, the way nature separates liquids inside of our body, is through micelles. Micelles are double phospholipid membranes, where the structure of your cell is a fat. Fats are what separate liquids in your body. So if you ever go home and want to do a little experiment, you can take a little drop of olive oil and just drop it on top of water, and you will see this beautiful round micelle forming. So that's how your body separates different liquids and makes different organelles inside your cell. So you have to have cholesterol and different kinds of fat to make those cell membranes. And cholesterol helps give the structure to your cell membrane. It also helps your cell membrane hold its electrical charge, which helps with keeping other cells away from itself. So there's not a lot of clumping that happens. LDL is also a very important molecule in how, when you're out in the sun, certain spectrum of light will hit your LDL in your skin, and that's how you actually manufacture vitamin D. LDL and other cholesterol moieties are very important for your immune system. They actually trigger different cells to recognize toxins that are given off by different bacteria, so that your immune cells know how to go over to that particular toxin or that bug and clear that bacteria. So there's actually research showing people who have very, very low LDL have about 10 times the risk of getting sepsis in the hospital. LDL is also, well, I already mentioned that one. So vitamins D, E, K, and A, those are fat-soluble vitamins a lot of people know about. Those are carried on fat. So cholesterol is important to carry and transfer those vitamins through your body and to deliver it to different cells. You need cholesterol to make all your sex hormones, all your stress hormones, bile acids. Bile acids are also made in your liver using different fats, and bile acids help you emulsify fat in your diet. Bile acids also help grab a hold of toxins out of your gut and carry them out into your poop. And bile acids are very important. You actually recycle them from your gut back to your liver to be used again. And so this is kind of a busy flow sheet, but the main important thing I just wanted you to see was way up at the top there. You see the very first ingredient is cholesterol. This flow diagram is how cholesterol flows through and makes various different stress hormones and all of your sex hormones. This is just another way that it just kind of shows different colored ways how you make, again, using cholesterol and all your stress and sex hormones. Okay, so where did cholesterol and the vilification of fat come from? Back in the 1950s, there were two researchers. Ansel Keys was a pretty well-known physiologist, and there was a British researcher, John, I can never say his name, Yudkin, and they both had very different opinions. Keys felt that saturated fat in the diet caused heart disease, and Yudkin felt that it was the refined carbohydrates and processed sugars that were causing heart disease. So Ansel collected research from 22 different countries over 12 years. Now this is where it gets interesting. He looked at all this research over those 12 years from 22 countries and was astounded that his knowledge that he learned was actually not supporting his hypothesis. So what happened was he didn't want to be insulted or his reputation, and so he got rid of 2/3 of the data, and he kept data from 7 countries, and he then published his research, and that then was used for the 1970s, where the AMA and the USDA said, yes, okay, we are going to recommend to the public that saturated fat is replaced with carbohydrates and PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are seed oils. So Also, what was going on at this time is that the sugar industry was giving the research world a lot of money. And so, unfortunately, the British scientist and his theory and hypothesis was kind of discredited and quieted down, and so that's kind of where the vilification of fat started from. And still today, we're kind of rearing with the ramifications of that, and a lot of people are fat phobic. Okay, modern research has debunked the hypothesis that Ansel Keys proposed, and so there's been a lot of research showing that there is no direct correlation of LDL cholesterol, of saturated fat, eating animal proteins have a 1-to-1 correlation with heart disease at all. So this is a nice one done in 2020 that looked at 63 different studies over 32 years, and again looked and found that animal protein is not significantly associated with cardiovascular disease or cancer mortality. This one in 2010 was a 23-year follow-up, also showing there's no significant evidence that dietary saturated fat was associated with a higher risk. And this one, way back in 2009, which I found was really interesting. It found that more than half of the people hospitalized with heart disease had LDL cholesterols of less than 100, and 18% had LDL cholesterols less than 70. All right, so how is cholesterol measured? Most doctors today order cholesterol through what's called a standard panel. It includes 4 different measures there that you see: total cholesterol, HDL, triglycerides, and LDL. If you look real closely, I don't know if anybody's done that on theirs, if you've had your cholesterol measured, but you'll see this CALC. This is a calculated number. It is not a measured LDL. They use the free-walled equation in the laboratory to compute your LDL. And then the doctor takes that number and plugs it into a 10-year risk calculator, along with blood pressure, if you're diabetic, if you're on medications for diabetes or hypertension, if you're a smoker, and spits out a 10-year risk score to then tell you where you fit on the spectrum if a statin or a medication should be recommended. So the standard lipid panel, again, is these 4 measures, and the LDL is a calculated number. Just to remind you again, that cholesterol is packaged on ApoB cargo ships. And one ApoB molecule equivalently is about 20 LDL particles. And again, you can see from this spectrum, there's a lot of different fat floating around. You're not just that LDL particle. Now, if we were gonna say and think that all LDL is created equal, okay? I'm gonna show you this here. It gets a little bit even more confusing. So it's called a subfractionation. You can split out, and we now know that even LDL by itself is not just LDL. There are 7 different subtypes of LDL. This is showing you 3 in this schematic. And even with HDL, which people label as the good cholesterol, is the same story as LDL. HDL can be subfractionated out into different sized vessels, okay? They're all having to do with these carrying proteins. And those carrying proteins have a limit to how much they can carry. And that's why you see different sizes. The chylomicron, just so that you know, the chylomicron really is the one molecule that your body uses up first, because it carries like 95%, that one cargo ship, the biggest one there, it will carry about 95% of its constituents on that ship are triglycerides. And your body likes to use triglycerides as fuel over cholesterol. All right, so now let's go back to looking at a total number. All these 4 people represent LDL cholesterols that have been calculated at 125. So each one of these persons has the same LDL number. But you see that they've been fractionated out and split into different kinds of LDL particles, like I mentioned. So if you were just to look at these 4 different people with 125 measured LDL, Jerry on the far left has nice, big, fat, fluffy, buoyant LDL particles. And those are considered light and fluffy and healthier. To the far right, you see Maria, again, has the same 125 measured LDL, but her LDL is very dense and small, and thus has a higher risk just by looking at the type of LDL that that person has. Not considering any other fat that's floating around, but just the LDL by the size of it. So when we subfractionate and split LDL out in the different kinds of LDL particles, there are the light and fluffy ones that are more buoyant and less angry, and there are the ones that are the small, dense. And the reason why we think that they're more atherogenic or problematic is because they don't have the room on their carrying protein for those antioxidant-rich vitamins, and that makes them more vulnerable to being oxidized. And it also seems that people who carry certain genetic SNPs, there's an LDL receptor, right? These proteins and fats have to have a lock and key and sit on something, so that's called a receptor. Those receptors can be mutated, and then a person can have higher LDL particles that are small, and they don't get cleared out, they don't get used up. And there are some people that carry an APO4 gene. Some people might know or have heard of that. I don't know, has anybody here had their APO status checked, their ApoE status checked? Okay. So just again, to show another depiction so you can understand this, is that a number, this one here uses 130, the same exact number. One on one side is light and fluffy and buoyant, and one on the other side, same exact number, is small and dense. So now you know which one is the one that's more concerning. Yeah, the small dense, right? All right, this is what it might look in the laboratory. I kind of like this picture because it shows you took a drop of blood out and you stick it in a machine and you ask the machine to fractionate out all the LDL. You will, well, cholesterol here, but you will see the LDL split out. It's counting each individual particle and putting it in the category of 1 or 2, which is the light and buoyant, fluffy, and all the way out to number 7, which is much more dense and small. And so this particular person has a lot more 3, 4, 5, and 6, which is more dense and small. So we call that pattern, when you have a lot more small dense particles, a pattern B, because it's more inflammatory. Now, let me see, I wanted to ask, well, before we go there, who knows what atherosclerosis is? No? Anybody? Okay, so the whole concern about cholesterol is heart disease, right? Most people die in this country of heart disease or cancer. And so when fat was villainized back in the 50s, and then we got the recommendation in the 70s to eat more carbs, eat less fat, and use plant fats like margarine and not lard and not animal fats, we started consuming a lot more of those, right? And so cancer risk and heart disease risk has not gone down. Obesity has not gone down. So the whole deal with cholesterol was this idea that it was the cause of heart disease and why people were dying. And atherosclerosis is a process where you have plaque building up inside the artery. So The initial theory about the cause of atherosclerosis was just the fact if you had fat floating around, it somehow just glommed onto the inside of your artery and started building up and causing plugged up arteries that then makes you at risk for having a stroke or heart attack. So that was the initial theory. So they thought, okay, well, let's just take all the fat away and people should have less problems, right? But I mentioned before, what percent do our bodies actually make our own cholesterol? Yeah. So you need fat, right? You need cholesterol for all those things we talked about. So cholesterol is not the bad dude. So it's trying to understand what is the actual process of atherosclerosis really, what's really happening? What's actually causing the artery to form plaque on the inside? So the current working theory is something completely different. And this is what I really want you to understand. So if you get a scratch on your skin, what do you normally see? Let's say if you get a little cut on the outside of your skin.
Redness.
You get bleeding, right? You might get pain, you get inflammation, you have a wound. So the same thing happens on the inside of the artery. This is how atherosclerosis begins. So you get a nick on the inside of the artery. We'll talk in a minute about how that happens. But when you get a nick, it instantly signals the fire department. You get microbleeding, so the clotting cascade gets activated. You get little chemokines and little tiny markers that your wound sends out to recruit immune cells, right? And so we talked a little before that cholesterol is on immune cells, so it can look for bugs or infections and eat them up. And you have fat floating in the artery. And what feels good if you get a cut on the outside? What feels good to put on there and soothe it? Does water feel good or does fat feel good? Fat, and nice emollient, right? So fat runs to the rescue and it plugs up that little plaque or that little nick. And now, depending on the kind of fat that you have, yes, fat is an ingredient for a plaque, but it is not the cause and the underlying root issue of atherosclerosis. The nick is the cause. So what can cause the nick inside the artery? Any idea?
High blood pressure?
Oh, smart woman. Good job. Anybody else? I'm a very visual person, so I'm going to give you an analogy that works for my head. I don't know if it'll work for you or not, but I like to see things and relate to things. And so let's look at this picture for a minute. What kind of feeling does this picture convey to you?
It's crowded.
Okay. What else?
There's a lot of individual pieces.
A lot of individual pieces. So to me, these tables are uniform. They're all decorated harmoniously, cleanly, and in my space, how I think about atherosclerosis is what's floating around in my bloodstream. I want something like this. So I want my fat to all be the same size, roughly, or so. I'm not saying the same size, but just uniform, spaced nicely with distance so that they're not bumping in and sticking to each other, that all the other constituents in my bloodstream are in harmony and communicating and cordial and clean surfaces and nice walls and everything around it. It just looks like a nice place. So, and the cholesterol, again, an analogy, are these tables, are all just spaced nicely and, moving through and flowing and aren't stuck on the walls and like this. Now, how about this?
More crowded.
Okay. Chaos.
Yes.
Chemical chaos. Okay, this is what can happen inside an artery. And those LDL particles, those tables that we saw in that previous picture, they're there, but where are they?
They're hidden.
They are likely, my story that I said, they're smushed up on the side of the walls.
Oh.
Those people tossed them, hit them, they're probably some are broken and on the side, right? And they're all just entanglement, and this is chaos, and this is just crazy. So this is what, in my view, is how I use an analogy, what can be happening to somebody who is having a heart attack when they're 40, or someone who is very inflamed inside, a lot of chemical chaos going on in their artery. And so the artery is just the bystander, right? The artery is the vessel that's containing everything, and it's dealing with all of this going on, okay? So these are all the different types of irritations or stressors that can happen. It's not exhaustive here. That can cause inflammation, and that chemical chaos that we just saw in that prior picture to cause a nick inside your artery. That again, your LDL or whatever cholesterol that you have floating around is just there to do its job and patch it up and to heal your wound. And the more chemical chaos that you have like this, the more nicks you're gonna have on your artery, and the more arterial damage you're gonna have, so the more atherosclerosis and the plugging and the clots that you're gonna have, and that's what the process is. So, if you smoke, if you eat a lot of sugar, particularly, like that British researcher confounded back in the 50s, he is the right one. Processed sugars, glycated, they're called AGs, advanced glycated end products, infections, all of these things listed here can all cause irritation to the inside of the artery and be the underlying root cause or many root causes to why a person is getting atherosclerosis, and it is not your LDL number. It is not your total cholesterol number. So how I like to look at it is this in my headspace. So the heart itself could have problems with it. So what problems? We already had somebody contribute high blood pressure. The heart can have an infection. The heart can beat irregularly, like AFib or any other kind of dysrhythmia. And then around the heart, there's other systems. So I'd like to think about metabolic dysregulation. If you have thyroid or cortisol issues, chronic stress, insulin resistance, any continuum along that. I like to think about the detox pathways. If you have methylation problems, sulfation problems, your glutathione isn't good. I like to think about the gut and the immune system, and we know about the gut-brain axis. It's all, again, communicating together, and then your hormones. All of these work all together all of the time, and some things can be out of whack, and those are going to cause those irritations to the inside of the artery, which then summon your clotting system, your immune system, and the fat that's floating in your arteries at the time. Okay, so be proactive, right? I told you before, 75% of people that are hospitalized with a cardiac event all have LDLs below 100 and 18% below 70, right? So the issue with us Americans dying of heart disease even today, despite the fad and vilification of LDL or cholesterol in our diet, is not identifying silent atherosclerosis. And so I feel that Madison's quote here is appropriate here. The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. If you understand and are empowered with more knowledge of understanding the process of atherosclerosis, and that cholesterol is just the hitchhiker, it's the bystander that's involved in the process, but it's not the underlying root cause, and you can understand that party scenario that I gave you and see that, and different processes that cause that inflammation in the artery, and that's what you want to be the Sherlock Holmes and figure out, right? It's more than just a cholesterol number. So, what do? Okay, this is where you do an advanced lipid panel. This is what I do, is personalized medicine, and It's about your story. It's about your family story. It's about your lifestyle. But these are some of the blood tests that I'll order to get a better story, picture of what's going on in your arteries. Okay? This is another test that I like to do. It's called the NutriVal. It looks at oxidative stress, your mitochondria. It looks at your fats, omega-3, 6, 9s, and their ratios. It looks at your methylation pathways. Sometimes I get a glyphosate level on people. Glyphosate is a weed killer, and it creates inflammation in your arteries. I might get environmental tox screens. We are exposed to lots and lots of chemicals, and some people don't clear them right? If your detox pathways aren't working so great, you might have a problem of elevated environmental toxins. So MTBE replaced, anyway, I could talk about all this stuff, but looking at different toxins can be part of the story. These are just a whole list of organophosphates. And this poor person, look at how high that person's was. I ask people to read labels, things that you don't even think, besides food labels, right? Phthalates. This is warning people about just sleeping on an air mattress and your exposure to phthalates that you're going to breathe and you're going to come in contact to, and some people might not clear plastics very well. The gut microbiome has been related to most all kinds of diseases now. Most people know that. These are the bugs that have been identified at helping the body metabolize cholesterol. So you can look at a person's gut microbiome. This is a stool evaluation. This particular person had 3 families on the far left when I started with them, and 14 months later was able to get a lot more diversity, which always translates to better health, the more bugs that we keep. And how the gut microbiome is related to heart disease is through what's called the leaky gut. Stuff in the gut is able to transfuse or permeate in through to your blood by holes basically, or weaknesses in the walls of your colon. Sometimes I get a food panel. When should you be concerned? In general, if you have chronic inflammation, you should be asking about that. You should be figuring out what's causing your inflammation. If you have a hip ratio, a waist to hip ratio that's elevated, you can do that yourself, right? These are simple things that you can give you an idea more than maybe what your doctor's talking to you about or alerting you about. If you have high visceral fat, that kind of goes with the weight and hip ratio. If you have any insulin resistance, specific genetic mutations can be a problem. And then there's a kind of phenotype called the lean mass hyperresponder, and those people should be followed. So, in conclusion, fat is needed for life, right? It's important in all those different kinds of processes. Inflammation is the root cause of atherosclerosis. So be proactive, test, don't guess, ask your doctor to explore what's going on in your milieu so that you can better understand your total cholesterol number and put it in the story, in the context, so you can discern what the best kind of lifestyle changes are good for you. So again, you can lower your risk of heart disease and age gracefully. And so I hope you understand a little bit more about cholesterol and numbers. And does anybody have any questions?
So if we were to contact you, how would that process work? Like, would you have to be our PCP, or
No.
can we just come to you and say?
No, I see people for consults.
Yeah.
Yep. And you could just reach out to me if you're tech savvy. On my website, I have new patient forms, and you can just fill them out. Once they're filled out, they just populate over to me, and then I'll reach out to you and make an appointment.
The last thing said lifestyle. Do you have any bullet points under that?
Okay, so that's kind of a loaded question, right? Jamie knows a lot about this. So first thing, since we're here in the gym, exercise, right? Sedentary lifestyle,
not
sitting is the new smoking, so move. And for me, moving for me is like weaving it into my day. So I like to find little bits of time in my day to weave in movement, so that I try to think about animals and kids. If you can mirror what they're doing, you're more likely gonna stay that way when you're older, instead of just compartmentalizing an hour out of your day or half an hour to move. If you can weave it, I think that replicates more of what we should be doing. So exercise, sleep. Sleep is huge. You should be getting 8 hours or so or more of sleep. And so sleep really needs to be looked at better, right? We spend a third of our life sleeping. There's a reason for that. Just like cholesterol is important. You do a lot of healing and a lot of flushing out when you're sleeping. If you have uninterrupted sleep, you need to fix it. So figure out what's causing that problem. Let's see, what else is other lifestyle? Free things. So free things that you should think about that you might not be thinking about is all of biology, right? All animals, all plants evolved on this planet, outside, under the sun, connected to the earth. And I realized in the last year more and more about chronobiology. It was never talked about in school, and I think that connecting yourself back to nature and grounding, which is your feet on the ground, or wearing shoes that connect you with the earth because it's negatively charged. So we are the only mammals that have sweat glands on our feet. We have an opportunity to absorb free energy from the ground, and we just aren't doing that anymore. And the sun is important, right? That's how we make vitamin D. And so if you think about how your grandparents or your parents lived, and think about how we've changed just gradually, I think that there's some lessons there that kind of go back to Einstein's famous equation equals mc squared. And so if you can connect yourself with nature by grounding and being outside more, the light spectrum is a lot more natural than being under LED lights or in front of screens. So I think that's a big part of health that I don't think is getting talked about. So to me, that's a lifestyle change. Food, right? Food's important. We all need to eat. So food for me, I think, should be 80% vegetable matter, and then protein and fat. A lot of roughage, a lot of vegetables, a lot of variety of vegetables. 30 different vegetables in a week would be ideal for most people. The fat, a lot of good healthy fat and omega-3 fats. I think Americans, we're not ocean-based anymore, so we kind of moved away from eating a lot of deep fatty fish. So omega-3s are very anti-inflammatory, and DHA is very important. And then we don't eat fermented foods. We didn't grow up that way. Our culture is very deficient in ferments, and ferments are how we get good bugs in our gut. So I think that should be a big component of what you eat. And then, what else? I think thinking about how you use technology and the forces that are present that are not seen have influence on our bodies too, and our physiology, that our grandparents never had to deal with before. And I think that's something that could be potentially bothering people. There's more to that to go into than what I can talk about tonight, but if you're interested, if you look for articles or things on easy water, that's structured water. It's a exclusion zone water is the water that we make inside of our bodies, and they help. And I think that's important to keep that production going on. What other lifestyle things? I think being positive and having gratitude and just watching your mind chatter is something that you can intentionally do that can have a huge effect on your inflammation. And yeah, I think those of us that run our own businesses, I think we have to be mindful of having fun and not working all of the time, which can happen. And people who are employed too, right? Sometimes you can just get into a groove of not taking your breaks that you rightfully earn and just be in the grind and eat in front of a screen, or just work until you're done, or even give some people really good workers and they'll work even more. And I think it's important to make sure you preserve time for your own personal use and quiet and do whatever it is that you like to do in that time. I think those are the big things.
That's a big list.
Anything else?
So, can you talk a little bit more about fats, right? So,
Yeah.
okay, so omega-3 fats and plenty of good things there, right, that are helpful. But talking more about just animal fats, right? And like, are there different things we should be thinking about, or what we're trying to do, or fats, other fats, right?
So what's interesting is that for the majority of people, if you're metabolically healthy, if you don't have a lot of these inflammatory, chaotic picture that I mentioned, and if you don't think that's you, then again, because we manufacture 80% or more of our own fat, regardless of what you do, you are not really going to impact your cholesterol all that much. If you are somebody who has a genetic SNP, okay, or you're a lean mass hyperresponder, okay, then eating saturated fat will raise your cholesterol. But if it's not in an angry environment, it's transient, it's fluxing all of the time, and it's not going to be any concern. In fact, the studies have found that all of the centenarians that have actually had their lipids done have very high cholesterol, and the majority of them are lean mass hyperresponders. A lot of the data drops off after 85, but there is data out there on centenarians. Just across the board, looking at all-cause mortality, people who have higher cholesterols actually live longer. So it's more than just the number, and that's what I think is really important. So when you're eating fat, I don't think you really need to be concerned. You really should be more focused on a lot of fiber, a lot of variety, the ferments, all of these things that I mentioned to you, and fat is along for the ride, right? Fat tastes good, fat makes more satiable. Our ancestors, right? My mom saved the bacon, right? Save the bacon grease and keep it and do stuff with it, right? And all the good stuff. Now there's all that craze. You can go to Whole Foods and spend $20 on a small little thing of, right? Just get it yourself, right? Get local bison from the farm down the road, right? Collect that fat, use that fat. Don't worry about the fat, eat it. But if you do have inflammation, right? You want to be smart, because there has been no drop in heart disease in this country with what has been done and what's been advocated and what people are still doing, because there's not that Sherlock Holmes of understanding what is going on inside your artery. So it's more important about that than I think caring about what you're really eating as far as fat goes. Is there anything more specific about animal fat that you were thinking about?
No, that was interesting. That was helpful. Yep.
Yeah.
Other fats to avoid.
Fats to avoid. I would never ever buy margarine or Crisco or any of those seed oils. I don't really cook with fat. I don't worry about fat in my food when I cook, but I don't pour fat in because, again, I think about what my ancestors would have done and I try to mimic or think about eating more like that. So they wouldn't have filled their pan full of olive oil when they're cooking their food, right? They would just get a big chunk of meat and they would cook it up. So I will take grass-fed butter, and if I need a little bit of something so it doesn't stick to the pan, I'll do just a little bit to line the pan, but I'm generally not cooking with a lot of outside oils than with oils already in my food. I don't and have never bought any canola, sunflower, safflower, soybean oil. All of those oils are not something natural or good for you to be cooking with and eating in foods, in my opinion. So when you heat an oil, if you think about it, or if you just heat food, right? Like beginning of my slide showed you the chemical structure of cholesterol. So when you heat something, you are breaking the bonds, right? So you are chemically changing the structure of that, and what happens with fats is that you can harm your fat. You can denature that fat and change that fat from what it is to something else that's even more harmful. And then now you're eating something that's a very inflamed fat, already adding, to the mixture. So it's called a flash point, and a flash point is kind of this area of it's a degree of heat that an oil can withstand before it starts to break down. So all animal fats can withstand high fat, and that's why those are safe to cook with if you're going to cook with any. Avocado oil and coconut oil can also be heated, but again, I just don't add fat to my food when I'm cooking. I'll just eat it. I crave a lot of fat. I eat a ton of fat. I eat a lot of nuts. I eat a lot of avocados. I don't worry about my lean grass-fed, bison that I buy, or grass-fed beef. So I hope that helps. And again, omega-3s are very deficient in American diets. When I check them, I have yet to see somebody that has a high enough omega-3 index. So I eat a lot of sardines, mackerel, herring, salmon. It's a great, quick and easy fat and protein to get and carry with you, especially if you're hungry. It'll keep you from stopping and picking up something on the go that's less healthy for you. And so that's something that you could think about too. Anything else?
So I was put on a simvastatin last year, and then we redid everything, and nothing much had changed. So I was just put on another type of drug. So would you recommend the advanced lipid panel, or
Yeah,
what would
you
do
probably
with that?
have a genetic SNP in a receptor, and so if you think about it, okay, if you're manufacturing 80% of your cholesterol for some of those reasons that I listed, and you take a medicine that's designed to either block absorption or block production, do you think if your body knows that cholesterol is good for you, it's going to figure out a way to make up that deficiency? Our bodies are very smart. We don't know hardly anything, really. So, yeah, I think that there's a website you can go to, nnt.com, and number needed to treat. There's something in medicine that's called all-cause mortality and relative risk reduction. And I think if you're ever given a medication, you want to go to that website and understand the research around that, because most doctors aren't going to know that. They're not going to have the time to tell you that or look it up themselves, but you can do that research yourself. And so for primary risk reduction, which means you don't have any heart disease, you've never had a heart attack or a stroke, and you have, through that calculated number, you have a high number, they put you in the risk. Okay, you're over 8-10%, you're at high risk, here's your statin. Okay, in that group, if you go to nnt.com and put that in, primary prevention of a statin, you will find that 100 people need to take a statin for 5 years to save one person from a heart attack or stroke. So 100 people have to take that drug for 5 years to save one person. And then secondary prevention, 32 people have to take that drug for 5 years to prevent a secondary heart attack. So the odds have changed there, but that empowers you with a number to say, gee, if I have to take, 100 people have to take this medicine for 5 years and one person doesn't have an event, is that a risk that I want to take with taking that medication? Does it make sense for me, or does it make more sense for me to figure out how to fix all this other stuff that could be going on, right? So that's what I have to say about that. And I'm not against statins at all. There's a time and place for everything. But what's important is to understand your milieu so that you can be more proactive at how to really get to the root and fix what's going on. I'll just give you an example. So if you need cholesterol to build cells, right? That's how your body separates liquids in the body. You go in to see your doctor and you have a cholesterol of 350, and they're like, whoa, holy crap, you're gonna die of a heart attack. You've gotta take this, right? But there wasn't the Sherlock Holmes going on, and you took that medicine and your cholesterol didn't change. You'd have to sit back and say, what is my body needing this cholesterol manufacturing for? What else could be going on? Well, this happened in a patient that I saw. This person had a cancer. Because what is a cancer cell? It's just your own cell, right? Going rogue and growing unchecked. But a cell is a cell. A cell needs cholesterol to separate and build another new cell, whether it's a cancer cell or not. But that person had a cancer present. And so that body upregulated cholesterol. It's either going to absorb it more from your diet, or it's going to manufacture it, because regardless, it's got to grow new cells. So you just have to understand how your body uses cholesterol, and then you will be smarter than probably a lot of doctors, because then you'll be able to say, okay, well, what's really going on? What could be going on here, right? Yeah. And so you're smart to say, oh, gee, that didn't work. What else is going on? Instead of, oh, maybe another drug is going to do the trick, right? Definitely be proactive. The one thing that is frustrating, and it's everywhere in medicine, is that there's not the time, there's not the ability to think creatively or research because of how the system is built. And so a lot of people are not getting enough time with their doctors, and they're frustrated. And it's easier for a doctor to take and write a script than to sit down and talk to you about lifestyle changes, or, hey, I don't know that answer, let me go look it up, let me go research, I'll get back to you. There's just not that time built into it. And so, so when something doesn't seem right, or following a typical scenario, yeah, and definitely be your own advocate. And
Awesome, thank you.
welcome. Anything else?
I don't have any questions, but I just thank you very much. I've learned many things and inspired and
Oh, you're welcome.
very, very,
Good.
I'd say worthwhile.
Good, good, I'm glad.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks, guys, for coming out and staying, and I appreciate it.
Hey.
And
Thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you.
fantastic.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
thank you.
That was very interesting.